An outcome of the Steve Witkoff meeting with Vladimir Putin yesterday produced a rather strange and unexpected outcome. The announcement started last night, but then again today, that President Trump and President Putin will meet face to face, potentially as early as next week. There's a number of places being considered, possibly Riyadh, possibly Istanbul, or the UAE. A number of options are available. But then information breaking just right before we came on air is now all of a sudden casting some doubt on that from the White House, as there appears to be some conditions that are placed on this meeting, which there's no way that are going to be met, I don't think, by the Russian side. And there's just chaos all over the map here. So it's hard to figure out what in the world is really going on here. And we need some help to figure this out. So we have Patrick Henningsen back with us today, host of the Sunday Wire and patrickhenningsen.substack.com. Patrick, really grateful to have you on today.
Great to be with you, Danny.
Well, listen, let's first of all, I want to show you. This is what President Trump said when asked about this last night following the Witkoff meeting in terms of what he thought was going to come out of it.
Mr. President, have Putin and Zelensky agreed to a summit yet? And where and when would that be?
Well, there's a very good prospect that they will. And we haven't determined where, but we had some very good talks with President Putin today. And there's a very good chance that we could be ending the end of that road. That road was long and continues to be long, but there's a good chance that there will be a meeting very soon.
What was the breakthrough today? Did Vladimir Putin make some kind of concession that he hasn't been willing to make before?
I don't call it a breakthrough. I mean, we've been working on this a long time.
You know, I found really odd that last part there, Patrick, where he said, well, there hasn't been a breakthrough. And then that should have led to the obvious question, well, if there hasn't been a breakthrough, why would you meet at the heads of state? What did you think when you first heard that yesterday?
It's like, well, we've got these, super secret, negotiations going on, and, Russia's not keeping any secrets about what its terms of the deal are. They never have, not from the beginning of the conflict when it began in February 2022. But with Trump, it's all sort of veiled in all these ambiguities and statements and back and forth, and we're working really hard on this and that, but he doesn't ever give any specifics. And that kind of worries me a little bit, because it's almost like they're playing to the press, but they're really not making any actual progress. Maybe the meeting with Witkoff in Russia was amicable. Maybe it was friendly. Maybe it was a good, way to reset the conversation after things getting so badly derailed after this Istanbul peace talks that happened before, and what happened right after that, which was a sneak attack hitting Russia's nuclear deterrent, Operation Spider's Web. So I'm not, it's like, well, it started off, well, he intends to meet Putin soon. Trump intends to meet Putin soon. Then they sort of look like signals from Moscow are that they have Yuri Ushankov, the spokesperson for the president's office, said, yeah, we're planning to meet. It would be first a one-on-one, and that would be Putin and Trump, presumably, and then that would lead to a trilateral summit, and the trilateral being the United States, Russia, and Zelensky. That's the problematic piece in all this. And
well,
Marco,
in fact,
go ahead.
We had just literally breaking just right before we came on the air. We see ABC News is reporting that the White House is pushing back on the Kremlin claim, because the Kremlin did. I saw that this morning when I first got up, that they're absolutely saying, yep, it's confirmed, it's going to happen. They're just trying to find the location, etc. And then here you see the ABC News is reporting a White House official told ABC News that no location has been set, and that President Putin must meet with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky for the meeting with Trump to occur, something that the Kremlin has not been willing to commit to so far. And, I just wonder why would anyone say that? And especially now, because obviously that wasn't part of the conversation that led the Russians to say they're going to meet with Trump. If they said ahead of time that, oh, by the way, you have to meet with Zelensky first, because I just don't see that happening. Do you?
No. I mean, there was an assassination attempt on President Putin not so long ago in the Kursk region. So, I mean, that's kind of a deal breaker regarding Zelensky. So there's probably going to be no meeting there. He's regarded as a belligerent by Moscow and someone who's clinging to power and doesn't really have a firm grip on power and is literally on his way out. So this would be the last person that you'd want to have a trilateral summit with, because unless the idea is to get Zelensky in there and then Zelensky gets ousted and then the deal is broken and we're back to square one. It's just kind of like Israeli style negotiations. And let's all be honest, the United States has become very adept at this type of negotiations where you have to wind it back to zero after making some progress at looks of what looks like progress on the surface, and then having it wind back to the starting point again. I mean, this has happened time and time again with almost every set of serious negotiations from the Trump administration. So look, if I'm a betting man, and I was always told by professional horse racing gamblers, they say never bet against the form. Never bet against the form. If that horse is going to die on the last quarter mile, there's no chance that in the next month he's going to show up, draft, and then do a gallant raid at the end and take the race. That's not going to happen. So the form on the Trump administration is basically string the public along, get the headlines, and then try to develop some last-minute leverage, or then some crazy sneak attack comes that derails the peace process. That's happened multiple times. So I'm going to bet 50% of my available wager on that happening. And there's too many parties that want to derail this. First of all, Zelensky. Second of all, probably the British don't want to see any. They're already dialed in for a long war. And some European countries are the same. They're well invested in a long, protracted
Germany
conflict.
and France come to mind.
Yeah. So am I going to bet against all that? Probably not. So I'm highly skeptical of this, because one thing I don't see, Daniel, is I don't see any acknowledgement by Donald Trump about the details of the situation. I don't see anything coming out of his mouth or any of his advisors that articulates the true nature of the situation, because there's no deal to be had if the United States, first of all, won't acknowledge that it's a co-belligerent. All you hear from Trump is they're killing each other. They're killing each other. Yeah, but the U.S. is killing Russians and NATO via Ukraine as their proxy. Russia's not killing Americans, but the U.S. and NATO are killing Russians. So they're a co-belligerent. So you can't have a trilateral summit. It's not going to succeed. You need a neutral party there to guarantee any negotiations and to be the glue that holds it together. That would be China, or that would be some other major power in good standing. There's not very many of them left.
Yeah, there aren't many in that,
That's the problem.
category. I wonder, Gary, if you could put that comment back up on the screen. What do you think about this? This is interesting. Nikos here, I believe, is I think he's actually a Russian person, but he says that the Russians are very angry, and I mean angry, at Putin for even meeting with Witkoff when they know an attack will happen soon. I think kind of echoes what you said a while ago. What do you think of that claim here that Russians are mad at Putin?
Well, if you understand the Russian political scene, you'll know that there's a large portion of the population that are quite hawkish on. They want to see this conflict be wound up and come to some conclusion, but they also are really furious at having been stabbed in the back by the United States and of course Ukraine. But with Ukraine, it's neither here nor there. But the U.S. led them along last time to peace negotiations in Istanbul. Russia sent a full delegation, and what happened? Surprise attack, Operation Spider's Web. I mean, that's just a slap in the face and disrespectful to the Russian Federation. So that they regard, and their foreign ministry are not fools. Lavrov and his team know that the United States is not agreement capable. They have to demonstrate that they're agreement capable at some point, and they haven't done it yet. So they'll still keep the door open. That's the Russian policy. Would leave the door open for diplomacy, for negotiations, but they're under no illusions as to what the U.S. Can do in terms of hold together with some kind of commitment. The other problem is, Trump can't hold fast to any enduring principles on all this. There's nothing he can fall back because he doesn't have any knowledge of the conflict. He doesn't understand the context of it. He doesn't understand what the terms really mean. You can tell if he did, you'd hear it from Trump at some point in the last 4 months, but he hasn't been briefed. He has no understanding of it. So he can't respect what the other side is putting on the table. And so do any of his aides? I have not heard anything articulate or accurate coming from any of his aides. Okay. So I have very little confidence that we have anything different going on here than we have before. To think that there's somehow this light bulb's come up and they somehow get it, and that they're going to be able to kind of do something the Russians will agree on, I'm not convinced. Honestly, I'm not. And they're always trying to get last-minute leverage and move the goalposts. That's been part of the form of the Trump administration. That's not going to fly with Moscow, unfortunately.
And you say that some of his aides don't get it here. This is what an odd statement by Rubio also yesterday, saying that, well, now then we finally have some understanding of what the Russians are asking for. This seems kind of strange to me at this point.
I don't know if it'll be next week or not. Well, it remains to be seen. I think it'll depend a lot on how much progress we can make. This is important in the sense that we think what happened was good because we have a sense now of what conditions the Russians would require in order to end the war. Now, they may not be the conditions Ukraine can accept or, frankly, that others would accept, but at least we have something to work off of. So I think a lot of that is going to depend now on how close can we bring the two sides to each other? Can we make enough progress? Can we get 85% of the way there, 75% of the way there? Because I don't think you can have a leaders level meeting if you're not close enough, because then nothing's going to come of that meeting. So we want to get it close enough, and then we want to give the president the opportunity to come in and close it. So I can't prejudge how long that could take. It could take hours. It could take days. Frankly, it could take weeks. We don't know.
A couple of things there. First of all, he's not very optimistic about anything. But then the other thing he's claiming, well, we don't really know, now that we kind of have an idea what Russia has. But, I mean, you don't have to go very far back, just the July 3rd phone call between Trump and Putin, where he laid it out, the June of 2024, where he laid it out. And, how can we say that now, yesterday, we have an idea?
That was the Rubio quote, was today we're closer to peace than we were yesterday. Well, we're also closer to Christmas. So, I mean, it's not really some kind of profound Confucian statement by the Secretary of State there. It's just ridiculous. They've got nothing. If they did have something, they would say it. And they would say it at a think tank panel discussion. They'd say it at a press conference. Plenty of opportunities with the Trump administration that's so media thirsty that they're on there all the time. But we don't hear any of the real important principles, the pillars of a negotiated or political settlement with Russia. There's not even NATO is ruled out for Ukraine. I haven't not even heard that said in definitive terms. So, and that's a major pillar of what Russia would be looking for some sort of a ceasefire. And any ceasefire is going to be interim because Ukraine has to prove, and its backers, of course, sitting in the background, have to prove that they're not going to sabotage any interim agreement. So, that's going to take time. It's not, as Alistair Crook, who's a great veteran diplomat and designer of negotiations, it's what happens after the agreement that matters. All the contingencies and all the sort of fallback positions from when things fail, and they will fail. There will be breaches. There will be problems. So what are you going to do? Is Trump going to go to Truth Social and say, Vladimir Putin said we thought he was sincere, but he's not, he's acting crazy. And then, no, the deal's off. I mean, because that could be Trump at the, in 2 weeks or after something was interim agreement was inked. And then he'll say, no, we want to get a missile treaty in there. We're trying to shove an INF style, all-encompassing missile agreement in there that has Iran in as well. I mean, this is where the White House wants to go, by the way, because Mike Pompeo already telegraphed half this stuff when he was Secretary of State last time. So we know Trump's not in charge, and that's what you have to. Trump is not strong enough as a leader. He is not disciplined enough to say no to the gaggle of grifters that are orbiting him, and he is not in charge. You can't be in charge if you don't have a clue what the actual terms of the deal are and the consequences of that deal. You cannot be in charge. So Trump is just going there and he's winging it. He is BSing his way through this. He keeps saying it's Biden. He said it yesterday. This is Biden's war. It's got nothing to do with me. I mean, how old is this shtick? I mean, how much more can you wring that rag out, Donald? You know, it's just, it is his war. It is his war. He escalated it in his first term, and he's had 7 months to at least bring it to a pause, and he's failed multiple times. So it is his war, and he's arming the Ukrainians. He's still giving them ISR. He's giving them weapons, you know, so it is his war. Own it. If you're a chief executive, own it. Stop trying to pawn it off on your predecessor. That's not leadership, unfortunately.
Yeah, good. I couldn't agree with that anymore. Yeah, that's exactly accurate. Whether anybody likes it or not, that is the truth. We mentioned at the top of this that now the U.S. is saying, well, you have to agree to a conversation from with Zelensky as well. Well, the British, who are usually really hawkish on all this kind of stuff, even they are saying, yeah, I don't see that happening anytime soon. Here's Mark Galeotti.
Trump has also said, well, he said last night that his meeting with Putin could be followed shortly by another in which the two would be joined by President Zelensky. How realistic do you think it is that Putin, Zelensky and Trump could all be in a room together?
Now, that one sounds a lot less plausible to me. I mean, first of all, remember the official Russian line is that Zelensky is not the legitimate Ukrainian president because his term has expired, even though under Ukrainian law they can't have elections at the moment. But more to the point, I don't think that Putin will be willing to do that, again, unless there's something very, very solid. You know, if he feels he's going to get the deal that he would like, then he'll probably be willing to put aside his issues and sit down with Zelensky. But for that to happen, he will need to have pretty much been assured in advance that Zelensky is going to agree to whatever deal is going to be on the table. And that seems extraordinarily unlikely.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what I was thinking even before I'd seen that ABC News report, that the only way that Putin's ever going to meet with Zelensky is if there's already been an assurance that Zelensky's going to submit to what the Russians want. Because you see, Zelensky has been demanding a meeting with Putin forever. I mean, for many, many months. I think back into last year, he's demanding that Putin meet me face to face, et cetera. And Putin's like, I'm not even going to give you the time of day. So there's no way he's going to do that if there's not already something on the table, because then Putin would be upstage, and I think that would be a terrible decision. So what do you see?
That's why Zelensky has wanted to meet Putin. He wants that media opportunity. That is that's Custard's last stand in media terms for Zelensky to do some gesture, say something, and that the Western media and everybody's going to rally around to say, look, he stood up to that evil dictator, Vladimir Putin. And that'll be Zelensky's last chance to captivate the global audience, of course. So it's not in Russia's interest to, play the part in a staged media event by the U.S. and Ukraine. But what he really wants is he wants that would reset the situation for a wave of support for him and for finance and weapons. But you have to understand something. If Zelensky actually made any concessions that moved towards a political settlement, a negotiated settlement, he would get the immediate backlash of the hardliners in Ukraine. And these are hardliners, I'm sure, that he fears that pose an existential threat to him, his life, and of course his administration, which is out of mandate. So he's already on thin ice. And if he gives any ground that the hardliners are not going to like, you could have like mutiny of a number of battalions. He will immediately be threatened, and he will be regarded as a traitor by them. So and Russia knows all this. That's another reason why Russia's like, this is a waste of time. Why would we bother? So because they know it was like Russia's already gamed this out way, way ahead. And it's almost like the U.S. is still playing checkers on this. So, I mean, I just don't see anything new here. That's the problem, Daniel. I'm looking for new clues that say this is different. This is fundamentally different. At least something, details, or some position that's reestablished by Washington that looks like it's a promising foothold towards something significant. I don't see it. Just Putin in a phone call and meeting Trump, it's not enough. That somehow, because if Donald doesn't understand the contents of the deal or the geography or the historical significance or, you know, what might happen, what could derail it, and appreciate all these things, then what's the point of him meeting Vladimir Putin anyway? I don't know.
Now, I do have some reports about what some are claiming that the various sides are asking for, what did happen behind the scenes. We'll get to that in just a second. But I want to address one other aspect first, because you're kind of really talking about what I think you're cutting through all the BS and stuff, and you're just looking at the issues and what they actually mean. But a lot of people aren't cutting through the BS. In fact, they might even be piling more on, because there's already a move afoot to pat President Trump on the back and talk about what a great leader he is and how strong he is. And here is Mike Gallagher, who was saying basically Putin blinked, and that's why we have this meeting.
In addition to the president's threat of sanctions, I think there are two other variables that increase our negotiating position and increase the likelihood of a durable ceasefire or some outcome that would be successful. One is the congressional threat of sanctions. Lindsey Graham's bill seems to be gaining steam. That enhances the president's negotiating position to be able to point to Congress and say, it's not just me in our system, it's also the United States Congress. It's called a two-level game. The second is the president's recent surge of conventional and strategic military power, repositioning nuclear submarines. The president has proven willing to wield hard power effectively, and that is the ultimate deterrent, and that's the language that Russia understands.
So in his telling here that it's Trump's threat of more sanctions and the putting of his weapons that has caused Putin to say, oh, darn, I guess I better submit to what Trump wants. And that means that he's going to get some kind of a concession from the Russian side that's against Russia's will. I mean, just react to that. I'll go leave it there.
That's one of the key elements in all this is the timeline. Okay. And the hardliners in the United States, whoever they are, the Grahams of the world and the rest of them. And in Europe, the biggest hardline faction is the UK. And if you look at the statements by the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer in just the last couple of days about wanting to stop regarding Russia's shadow fleet of tankers as threat to global security, threat to everybody's national security. And so they need to be destroyed. And so Russia leaked a report from about sabotage operations in the Baltic Sea to basically hobble the Russian, quote, shadow fleet, i.e. Sanctions busting shipping that's going around the world, and then leaning on India for buying Russian oil. This is another major move this week by the United States. India's buying Russian oil and then reselling it to Europe at a profit because the West has put a price cap on the Russian oil. I mean, you can't make this up. So India's making plenty of money. They're not happy about being targeted with secondary sanctions. India's too big of an economy, too big of a force to intimidate like that. So is China. So I don't think the U.S. is going to really get anywhere with that. But the hardliners, Daniel, the hardliners in the U.S., in Britain and in Europe, they believe that given enough time, we can hurt Russia and we can bring Putin to his knees and bring him to the negotiation table. That's why I said at the beginning of the conversation was try to create leverage, because the Trump administration believes that if they can just create a bit more leverage, they can get a better deal. That's how they're approaching this. This doesn't work in this situation. This is a fatal flaw of the approach of the United States government, the current administration. It's a major fatal flaw, because they're basically saying that everything that happened before this in history is null and void and irrelevant, and all that matters now is just the leverage to do a deal now. And it's much, much deeper than that. The other parties are taking so much more into consideration. And I don't even think they got the economics right on the sanctions. They're still deluded in America. They think that sanctions is a potent weapon against the Russian Federation. And then the tariffs are going to be like the sort of right hook. The sanctions are the left hook. And so we're going to, once again, we will bring the Soviet Union to their knees by choking them off and getting in an arms race and all these things. So we're back in the 80s again. sort of recycling some of these old ideas that, if you look back in history, didn't actually play out the way a lot of people in Washington claim they did back then. And so this is a chronic problem of Washington, is using tropes from the past and basing policy directions on that. Like, this is going to be their Afghanistan, Ukraine. It's going to be another Afghanistan, like we did with the Soviets. That ended the Cold War and we won. The Star Wars bankrupted the Russians. The arms race, we brought them in. The reality is it's much more complex than that.
Yeah.
Talk to any economist. But I see the same type of things informing policy now, that it means that the stuff is just not fully baked at all. And so the results aren't going to be there. That's a problem. So then just extend the timeline, wonder weapons, another round of wonder weapons. If this doesn't work, then it'll be another round of wonder weapons. That buys you like 6 months. And so we could be into 2026, spring of 2026, and more or less in the same place as we are now.
Yeah, well, that again, that's just really frustrating to hear, because we see it play out. It's detached from reality, and it's just like, well, it's just, I think, to your point, drag the timeline out, so maybe something will appear and magically, and all the things. Even though we say yes to the left hook, right hook that you talked about, sanctions, tariffs, even though it has caused wreckage across the board and has been utterly failed and everything, but maybe next time, maybe it'll work then. That's what it seems to me is going on here. One of the things I want to talk here a little bit differently. We talked about, like British, you've mentioned sort of the British stuff, some other Europeans. We've seen what the United States, and we talked about Russia. The one we hadn't talked about so far is Ukraine. And Zelensky kind of seems to be just a sidebar player in this, that the rest of them are talking around. But he also made a comment yesterday, and it's kind of interesting to me for a couple of different reasons. Let's see what you see.
Якраз дорогою від наших бригад тут на Сумщині я говорив з президентом Трампом, і це розмова після того, як представник президента Трампа Стів Віткоф був у Москві. Наша спільна з партнерами позиція, вона абсолютно конкретна, вона абсолютно прозора. Війну треба закінчувати і робити це чесно. Це дуже важливо, робити це чесно. На дзвінку були європейські лідери. Я вдячний кожному за підтримку. Ми обговорили, що звучало в Москві. Схоже, Росія тепер більше налаштована на припинення вогню. Тиск на них спрацьовує. Але головне, щоб вони не обманули нас в деталях, ані нас, ані Сполучені Штати. І ми запропонували, щоб найближчим часом наші представники України та партнерів, наші радники з питань безпеки говоритимуть, щоб визначити нашу позицію, нашу спільну позицію і наш спільний погляд. Для нас, для України це дуже важливо. Україна точно захистить свою незалежність. Нам усім потрібен тривалий.
Yeah, the devil's in the details there. The definition is even more important. When you say a just and lasting peace, I mean, that kind of echoes what Keir Starmer's been saying, and that is very different from the definition given in Moscow. But it did seem to me, from my ears, that he was somewhat less defiant on this one, and more like, well, I really hope it ends up this way. How do you see his play here in comparison to Russia, Trump, and the European Union?
This is he's kind of on desperate straits right now. One of the things as well, just a superficial comment on that video, Zelensky takes so much care, I think, to curate the public relations of every type of statement he puts out on social media or on television. And that was like behind a dilapidated elementary school playground set. And it's not a very good look for Zelensky. So he's basically saying it's time to end the war. It's time. Why would he be saying that? Why? That's a reflection of what's going on in Ukrainian society. Okay. So he is feeling the heat. He's feeling the pressure. There's a lot of talk about corruption investigations right now. He is implicated in some of that talk. Plus, replacing him, the British are dangling Zelensky around right now, like basically sending a signal to Zelensky, look out, he's coming, and there's not going to be room for both of you in Kiev, full stop. Or it could be somebody else. So And I'm sure U.S. knows that this idea of Zelensky being a counterparty to any that's been off the table for a long time. U.S. knows that. So Zelensky, I think it's going to happen very quickly for him. When it does, he'll have a very short window of opportunity to get out of the country before something bad happens to him. Unfortunately, that's just the situation there. But so who knows when that's going to happen? But I'm sure that's part of the calculus between Moscow and Washington, because if that's a deal breaker for Moscow, then it's kind of easy for the U.S. to engineer a regime change in Kiev. That's not a difficult thing. I wouldn't think so. And the heir apparent is waiting in London. He's been groomed for this actual thing, which is the former commander of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, Valery Zaluzhny. Okay, and he's been given elocution lessons. He's wearing a Savile Row suit. They have scrubbed him up nice, and he's got his memoirs out in a bookstore near you now. So he's like, they've established him as only the British can do. The British can do political makeovers better than anybody. Look what they did with Jelani in Damascus. I mean, that's a British operation. So Zaluzhny is primed and ready for the world stage. The question is, what would that entail? So that's what I'm guessing. Looking at Zelensky, he's out of mandate. He's not going to run for president again. He's holding up the deal. It's not looking good for him.
And therefore, it's not looking good for the Ukrainian people. And that's what has always motivated me to desire for this to be over and to advocate for it to be so. But let's see what chances there are. So I mentioned at the top of the show, there are some reports out there about what the various sides are saying. So here is Sergei Markov, who is a Kremlin insider and claims to have a lot of information inside what was going on in the Kremlin. And he's saying that this is what that actually, Gary, that's not the one. I'm looking for what Witkoff brought in first. Yeah, this is apparently what Witkoff was offering. He said a ceasefire in Ukraine not through a peace agreement. Thank you, not for a full peace agreement. Right now, ceasefire, de facto recognition of Russian occupied territories by postponing the status issue for a long time, the lifting of the most sanctions imposed on Russia, and in the long term, a return for energy cooperation, especially in Europe, from Russian cheap oil and gas. Meanwhile, the proposal reportedly does not include guarantees against NATO expansion, one of Moscow's consistent demands. Russia did not receive any promises that military support for Ukraine would cease. However, according to the outlet, the last point is said to be acceptable to the Russians. I'm not really clear on how much that is accurate. I don't know that Russia would agree to anything if there's not guarantees against NATO expansion, because that seems to be one of the prime factors that led to the attack in the first place. But do you see this as potentially legit, that this is what was offered?
I don't know. Looking at the source of that article, and it's a sort of EU-Ukrainian sort of love-in website. They're aligning Ukraine with the EU since 2014. So it's obviously going to slant against Moscow. Look like it's somewhat, Ukraine's getting something like an open-ended possibility for NATO membership, perhaps. I mean, you have to remember as well that the public relations of this, whatever comes out, whatever's said or leaked or whatever, that doesn't look like it's good for the hard line in Ukraine or the hard lines of Europe. It could basically, deep six the thing before it even gets started. And so that's, I can't imagine that they would have the terms leaked in public. And if so, that haven't even been agreed on yet. So it's like just pro forma kind of bullet points about what's going to be discussed, and it's being packaged as a leak or something like that. I'm not convinced.
I said, Marco, that's actually was by the Polish outfit Onet is what's recorded.
Okay.
The claim that's what Witkoff brought into the meeting yesterday. But then Markov this morning talked about what the Russians, what they appear, and they say Russia is not against a ceasefire in principle, but Russia is against a ceasefire that would simply be used by the West, NATO, and Europe and the Ukrainian regime to prepare a new bloodier phase of the war. In other words, Russia opposes the use of a ceasefire for maximum militarization of Ukraine. Therefore, Russia supports the ceasefire with conditions, and the main conditions are: 1, an embargo on the introduction of foreign troops into Ukraine territory; 2, an embargo on massive arms supplies into Ukraine; 3, the cessation of forced mobilization in Ukraine; and 4, the creation of a truly neutral mechanism to monitor the ceasefire. Now, that sounds a little more plausible to me, and that also sounds very similar to what Russia said back in March of this year when Trump first brought up the idea of a unconditional ceasefire. They said, well, no unconditioned, but here are some conditions that we would consider it. How do you see that from what they've been saying?
Well, the first two, on the second bottom half of that, number 1 and 2, the embargo on the foreign troops and the embargo on the massive arms supplies. So that means that it's not going to be de facto turned into a NATO zone without foreign troops. That's a good thing for Russia, of course. And then the massive arms shipments, that's along the lines of demilitarizing Ukraine. So that's on Russia's main bucket list and has been from the beginning. So those tick a couple of boxes, at least in the interim. The most difficult part of that, it will be the last one, the creation of a neutral mechanism to monitor ceasefires. I mean, that's to me almost impossible in the current situation. That would take tremendous amount of political discipline, the likes of which you would need a chief executive in Kiev that could hold the line on that. He's not there at the moment. You've got somebody else. That's the problem. And that could be a deal breaker certainly for Russia. That last one, deal breaker. If you can't get that in place, all of the other stuff, it might be good intentions and it might make sense, but nothing is going to be finalized. That's the problem. And I hope the U.S., whoever's honestly wanting to see a negotiated settlement here, that they fully grasp that, or that they're not using this in order to do what they did last time, which was to change facts on the ground and then somehow alter the trajectory of this conflict in favor of the West and Ukraine. There's a lot of pressure to do that. Pressure from Britain, pressure from some of the European partners. Certainly Germany looks like it's doing that. Scandinavia is all guns blazing at the moment. France, I'm not sure exactly where they are. Poland, little bit strident, yeah. So, I mean, there's plenty of parties on the Western side that don't want to see this happen. That's my belief. And I'm a skeptic in that sense, but I hope I'm wrong.
Well, and in fact, speaking of the Russian thing, so Markov also, in a post this morning on Telegram, said his European contacts are telling him that this is what it looks like from the Europe, what they're asking for. So far, Europe and the West in general are blocking these ceasefire conditions. The leaders of France and Britain have openly stated that on the second day of a ceasefire, they will introduce troops, 10,000 each, and a total of 50,000 European troops into Ukrainian territory. They refuse to give any restrictions on arms supplies to Ukraine. They plan not to stop forced mobilization, but on the contrary, demanded that Zelensky lower the age to 18. And for monitoring, they proposed the OSCE or the UN, but NATO effectively controls their secretariats there. So that's kind of the same for them. The ceasefire conditions should be on the negotiating table. It's difficult to implement this immediately. Therefore, Russia proposes a phased-based approach to start introducing temporary ceasefires of 24, 48, 72 hours, etc. And as an option, a partial air ceasefire. I don't know if you saw that, but apparently the Russians themselves were floating an idea, at least reportedly, about 36 hours ago, where they said, hey, how about we do a partial ceasefire that neither side would hit the energy infrastructure of the other for some given period of time, but nothing on the ground, and all these other things that would continue on just as it has been, which of course would be good for Russia because they're okay with having their oil infrastructure safeguarded, because they've actually suffered some real losses from the Ukrainian drone and missile fire here late. And of course, the Russians do hit the Ukrainian side pretty hard, so they would benefit from it too. But Russia wouldn't benefit from a full ceasefire on the ground without these other conditions. How do you see that?
Well, I hadn't seen this Telegram thing before, but it kind of reflects what I said previously about how there's definitely two different agendas, regarding what Washington may or may want and what Europe wants. and I'm talking about the hawks in Europe, and I'm talking about Britain as well. The one thing on that list there that's probably a non-starter for Russia is the OSCE being involved in monitoring, because they've already been dubbed persona non grata by Moscow for allegedly sharing Russian positions with Ukraine in the Donbass, and this goes back to 2.5 years, or almost 3 years now. So and that's seen as a betrayal by Russia, because they supported the OSCE from the beginning. That's an outgrowth of serious peace negotiations coming through the early 90s to the present, and they regard that as a major betrayal, one of many by Western institutions. So that's a non-starter there. So why would Europe even bother putting that in unless they know it's going to get rejected? So it's like the Israeli negotiation style. You implant things into the negotiations that the other side will not accept, and then you blame the other side for basically saying no to a, quote, perfectly good deal. So is that the game that we might end up playing for a while? Is that the toggle that might be happening politically, so that certain people aren't going to lose face and that they can keep on with whatever their underlying agenda is? Certainly in Europe, if you listen to the leaders there, they're not really talking peace. It doesn't sound very peaceful. It sounds like they're gearing up for war. So is the economy.
Here's the puzzling part, though. If we were just talking about the Western side, this Ukraine, Europe, and the United States, then I could absolutely can see where that would be the possibility. But here we have the Russian side agreeing to meet at the head of state level between Russia and the United States, at least according to this morning's news out. So either they have a different agenda where maybe they want to say, well, we're trying to go to peace. And then when they know that the European or the Western side is not going to play along, then maybe the Russians will say that. Or Putin said, no, maybe I can work with Trump and we can actually figure something out and end this war. And now then they're being duped. I mean, which of those possibilities do you see?
Well, it's very important for Washington and for the Trump administration, who's under quite a lot of pressure on a lot of multiple fronts, actually, and hasn't got any W's, not real W's anyways, desperate for a W. But it's very important for Washington to be seen, or Trump anyway, being the sort of, he's going around doing like press junkets saying that he's stopped 4 or 5 or 6 wars in the last couple of months.
The numbers
we're going to stop this one too. This is the big one. We're going to stop this and add this to my list of stopped wars. It's very important, clearly, that Trump needs to be seen to be dictating the pace of events internationally. So they're trying to basically appear to do this, but they keep running into the same fundamental problem, which is they can't dictate the facts on the ground in Ukraine. And you can't change that. That's unalterable. So Russia ultimately will dictate the pace of everything. Maybe not the Western media coverage, maybe not, some of the bullshit comments and speeches that Trump is so famous for now, but the U.S. is not going to dictate the pace of what's happening on the ground in Ukraine. Moscow's going to. And that's the big issue there. So Russia's prepared, done so much preparation for this. They've been prepared at every single juncture since this began. They're prepared what they're going to do for the next year, probably before they even got involved in the current conflict. And the Trump administration doesn't appear to have done any serious prep, not to the level that Russia has. So they're always going to be playing catch up. So again, Russia's going to dictate the pace of events, and ultimately probably the pace of negotiations. And if the U.S. and Donald Trump doesn't like it, they'll just basically throw their toys out of the pram, and Trump will go to Truth Social and say something like we said before, and then we're back to square zero again. So the thing that's missing here, and I have to reiterate this, Daniel, there needs to be another neutral foreign power, some country of good standing with some decent weight that can be as a guarantor of these negotiations, because this trilateral business is no good, because the U.S. is a co-belligerent in this conflict. And if they can't even honestly come out and say that publicly, then they're already being disingenuous from the get-go. And it means that whatever they're planning or thinking they're going to do is actually doomed to fail. and it can't be a European or a NATO member either.
Right, right.
It needs to be somebody not in NATO and who's not involved in this proxy war.
One last thing on this topic that I want to discuss, and hopefully we'll have time for one other one on a different topic before we let you go here. But how does it play in that Donald Trump had set Friday? So tomorrow was supposed to be the deadline that Russia either agrees to an unconditional ceasefire, or there's this whole new set of sanctions and tariffs going to be secondary sanctions on other people, et cetera. And then yesterday, Trump preempted that and for some reason singled out India and said, I'm going to double their tariff to 50% because of the Russian oil thing. He definitely tied the two together, but hadn't hit anybody else. And so the question is going to be what's supposed to happen tomorrow? But in the light of trying to meet with the Russians, why is there still an additional threat of 50% sanctions on India? How does that work out?
I can't see how this is really thought through, because India is a very important partner to the U.S. and to Europe on so many different levels, not just in the tech sector, but there's a lot of things that they're fully integrated into the Western supply chain of so many different things that to start an ad hoc trade war off the cuff is crazy. I mean, I can't see how that's going to benefit the United States. It only can bring problems to the economy. It can create uncertainty. There's a lot of investment tied up between India and the United States, and there's a lot of cooperation between these countries. And so Donald Trump's coming in here and saying, because we don't like that you're doing this one thing, we're going to basically, throw the entire, relationship in the economy into a giant maelstrom. And that's not statecraft. And so it's like, I don't actually think this is going to go anywhere, because the Indians are just laughing. Modi's just like, no, what are you going to do? You're going to sell us oil as cheap as Russia's selling us? I don't think so. They put a price cap on Russian oil to punish them, and India's just taking advantage of the free market. And right. That's all. India is being capitalist. Donald Trump is running his geopolitics like, I don't know, it's sort of like an authoritarian raving Marxist on a global scale, putting price caps on things, and Europe is doing the same, and India is just saying, "Fine, this suits us right down to the ground. We need cheap oil, and we'll sell the surplus to Europe for a little profit, and we'll mix the oil as well and make a good little crust." And Europe's getting its Russian oil via India, because you need energy in Europe. So everyone's just basically adapting to a situation created by Brussels and Washington. And now Trump's complaining about it. So it seems like the easier route here is
what's going to happen. Yeah. What's going to happen on tomorrow especially if this latest wrench that apparently just got thrown into the works that the United States is telling Russia that, oh, by the way, you have to agree to a Zelensky Trump Putin meeting before we'll meet with you. And if Russia goes, yeah, we ain't doing that, then that means that tomorrow is going to be August 8th. It's going to be the 10-day deadline. And Trump's either going to have to levy sanctions on all these people, or he's going to have to not. So how do you see that playing out? That's right. What's going to happen? Remember that was the big ultimatum, wasn't it? From 50 down to 10 to 12 days. It's coming due now. What's it going to be? What's the hammer that's going to drop? Because there's got to be a hammer that's going to drop. If the hammer doesn't drop, even if it's a performative hammer, like announcement of new sanctions or something like that, is it going to be some kind of gallant military raid by the brave Ukrainians, still feisty and willing to fight? We just need to give them more weapons. I don't know what it's going to be, but if it's nothing and nothing happens, then these people are just going to continue laughing at the president for making all of these idle threats constantly and spouting out on social media like this. This is no way to run foreign policy. And this has been said by the Chinese, actually called Trump on this week. I don't know if you saw that. I think it was the Chinese foreign minister just in the last 24 hours saying, this is not professional. You can't run foreign policy from your Twitter account. This just is not acceptable. Trump is not a serious statesman to do that, because it's all hot air.
Look at everything that he's pushed out and on social media and that Rubio's pushed out and all the rest of them. How much of that actually stuck? How much of that actually is workable, actually, became policy or was effective, and all the tariffs constantly coming and going. He's using tariffs like sanctions. So tariffs have become meaningless. They've just become a weaponized version of sanctions. And all it's doing is pushing India and pushing these countries more towards the BRICS relationships. And it's taking capital out of America. It's taking direct foreign investment out of America. Capital's moving to Asia. And there's total uncertainty about how the West is managing their economy. Investors hate uncertainty. They hate it. Right. They want certainty. The global capital is going to follow the sure thing. The smart money is going to follow what they can bank on, and they can bank on Asia. And more, it's looking like they can bank on BRICS, because BRICS is stable and it's not run by complete maniacs. At least they're not acting like maniacs. So I can't tell what everyone's like, but Donald Trump has been very bad, I think, for the United States in this regard.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's the way it is. So we'll see. We'll see if this meeting even happens next week. We'll see if this report from ABC News was true or not, because it wasn't by anyone named, and the Trump administration themselves haven't articulated that. So we'll see if that actually transpires, and then we'll just follow the thing. And of course, we'll see tomorrow what ends up happening or doesn't with Trump's claim there. So we'll all follow that. In the remainder of the time I have with you here, though, I want to get your update or your assessment on these twin decisions from yesterday, and I think one will officially happen later this day, where Netanyahu says that they are going to completely occupy the Gaza Strip, and also that the United States says that they're going to take over the feeding of the people in Gaza. How do you see those two things working out?
First of all, the United States has already taken over the feeding of the people in Gaza, and you can't really call it feeding. It's scraps and piecemeal aid. And they're doing that under the supervision of the IDF. The IDF is the client of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation and all the myriad of military contractors that fall under that umbrella. That was shown by Anthony Aguilar, the whistleblower, in the last couple of weeks. So Israel, listen, if you're operating in Israel's domain, you operate under Israel's authority. Be very clear about that. Otherwise, the United States is generally not, in any meaningful sense, will not be fully welcome in Israel's orbit there, because anything that's going to potentially undermine Israel's business and what it wants to do and how it wants to do it is going to be problematic for Netanyahu and for the current regime in Israel. So they'll allow the U.S. to come in to perform certain roles superficially, and maybe in a somewhat expanded version of what we're seeing right now, which is an absolute debacle from a humanitarian point of view. It's just beyond the pale what we're seeing, the scenes with, and the scandals that are coming out with this. They're just going to increase. So this is just echoing that rhetoric that we saw right after Trump was sworn in, about a Gaza Riviera, and we're going to take it over and we're going to run it and this and that. I think I really can't see Israel wanting to do that, not in any major way, not giving the U.S. any sovereignty over that strip at all, because the Israeli plan is this could all just be smoke and mirrors to get from A to B, because what Israel does really well is create a lot of situations and string together agreements and string them along while they change facts on the ground. And they are changing facts on the ground in Gaza. They're changing the demographics. They're changing the habitable settlements and places where Palestinians can actually live. That is being changed as we speak. The homes are being eliminated. People are being killed. They're being herded into tent cities, which a lot of people are calling concentration camps, via these humanitarian rat runs that are being constructed by the IDF and the so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. So all of those facts on the ground are changing, and they're doing airdrops now for public relations. allowing countries to go in and drop aid from the air when all of the aid is on the ground waiting to come in, and the same aid that had been coming in for years and years that Israel has stopped. And the U.S. totally endorses the cessation of aid and killing of the UN relief and works agency called UNRWA. So that's the real story here. So everything you're seeing here is a distraction to stay away from the fundamental issues that have created this Holocaust. I'll use that term because this is a term that a lot of people are using more and more, and it's what we're seeing with our own eyes, especially with the aerial shots from the aid drops. I mean, what else do you call a completely desolate landscape that used to be a thriving, urban center full of hundreds of thousands of people that's just been reduced to rubble? What do you call that? We don't have words in English for this. So I'm seeing this, Daniel. I'm seeing these statements by the Israelis, statements by Trump. Israel's bringing over congressmen this week for an IPAC conference. I think they just held something in Israel, and some people came over. So they're doing a lot of these moves, but I don't see the situation improving. It could just improve like this. It could happen overnight. All you need to do is allow the aid through on the ground via Egypt. And it's the humanitarian situation can quickly be stabilized and maybe with enough time reversed. I'm talking about 6 months or a year. Okay. Yeah. None of that's happening now. None of that's happening. So what is actually going on? Do you trust the Trump administration and the Netanyahu regime that they're going to be doing something in the best interest of the native Palestinian population in Gaza? I don't think so, because their record isn't very good at the moment. So no. I am hugely skeptical of any of these pronouncements that there's anything genuine there, and that they're doing anything in the interests of the Palestinians in Gaza. I don't see it.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't either. And unfortunately, also, we'll continue to keep an eye on that. And just we have to pray that some things will change and enough pressure, because there is a lot of pressure coming from elsewhere in the world. A lot of people have just reached their limit on this, and hopefully that will have its effect for the hapless population in both Palestine
and there is a hope, Daniel. In Europe, Spain and Belgium and a number of countries are really moving ahead. With Slovenia is another one. They're really putting pressure on Israel now. Spain being really important, and then Spain's being attacked by Trump for doing this. He's threatening them with other things and saying that he said they're part of BRICS. I don't know who told Trump that, but he thinks Spain is part of BRICS. But this is a great sign, and the statesmen that have had to at least publicly say they want to endorse a Palestinian state. Whether they do or not, I'm not convinced they will. But those European countries like the UK and France and so forth that are making those noises, they're doing so because of public pressure and because of the optics are so bad. So there's a lot of hope that we could see some big changes coming from Europe in the next couple of months that will basically change the game, hopefully. So there is hope there.
Yeah, and any kind of hope I'm willing to, I want to grasp hold of. So I'm encouraged by that. So thanks for sharing that. Appreciate it. And in fact, thanks for all this stuff today and providing this such clarity on all these issues here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And we thank you guys for joining with us today. Be sure and like and subscribe if you haven't done that yet. We always appreciate that. And also let your friends know we're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podcast Addict, because I know a lot of folks actually prefer to get their information via the audio podcast. So don't keep this information to yourself. Share it with them. And also we're on Substack, Daniel Davis Deep Dive, all one word, .substack.com. For those who prefer to get the written word, we are also in there. We're expanding our universe so more people get a chance to see the unintimidated and uncompromised truth that you're benefiting from today. So be sure and share that. And we'll look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.